We got to support our workers, of course. Like, we're like the workers are the backbone of the economy. How could we not support our workers? And we want somebody in Congress who's representing our interests.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Hey y'all, Adam Keller here with the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk show. And I'm excited about this interview we have lined up today. We're going to be talking to Elizabeth Anderson, who's running for Congress here in Alabama. And I was intrigued because she is a pro-union businesswoman who is running for Congress. That's pretty interesting here in Alabama. And so I thought it'd be cool to talk to her and see what her campaign is all about, why she's running. And also, full disclosure, I did reach out to her opponent, Congressman Gary Palmer. So, we'll stay tuned and see if we get a response there. We're happy to have anyone on the show to talk about what they plan to do and what they have done for working class people here in the state. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So just to start us out, could you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to run for office?
Sure. So I'm Elizabeth Anderson. Like you said, I am running for Congress in Alabama's District 6. I live in Shelby County, which is one of the counties covered by District 6, but I'm originally from Childersburg, Alabama. Childersburg, Alabama, for anybody who doesn't know, is a teeny tiny little working class town here in Alabama. Big paper mill there. So that's wonderful. It's a great community. I was born and raised there, and I was actually in poverty for the majority of my life. So when I was growing up, I grew up below the poverty line. We took advantage of things like SNAP benefits and, government housing, and we were on free lunches, and we were so grateful for all of those things because, if we didn't have free lunches, that I wouldn't be able to eat a lot of days. So to call our family working class would have been aspirational for us, but we grew up below the poverty line. Now we have one exception in my family who was not in that situation, and that was my papaw, my grandfather. And he actually had a really great union job out at the paper mill in Childersburg, and saw firsthand what that meant for him and, for our broader family too, because he was always the person who was there for us, and he was able to provide for us in a lot of ways that others in my family were not able to. A lot of that had to do with his really good union job that he had. So he always told me two things when I was growing up. He said, vote blue and go union, right? So it was always very important to him. He kind of drilled that into my head when I was growing up. And I saw firsthand what that meant for him, because he had a really great stable job. He had a pension. He had a lot of benefits from that job that a lot of the rest of us didn't have. So that was kind of the start of why I started caring so much about union work. Like I said, I grew up below the poverty line, but I was able to leverage things like Pell Grants and scholarships to be a first-generation college student. I went to the University of Alabama, got a music degree. That's a long story. But then I went to go work in the tech industry. So I'm in the tech industry now, actually own a business called Lunar Lab. We are a benefit corporation, which means that we're a for-profit company, but we are legally required to consider social and environmental impact in every decision that we make, from who to hire to how we advise our clients to even what kind of paper we use in the printer. So we are hugely into, making sure that we have a positive benefit in our broader community with our company. Other thing I wanted to add was that I worked in the tech industry for a long time, and it can be really toxic, right? So there are a lot of worker abuses that go on in tech, and we don't have unions in the tech industry. In fact, I know a lot of people are trying to build up unions in our industry, but there are a lot of things that go on with workers. And in fact, I ended up suing a former employer for sex discrimination and pay discrimination, as well as retaliation. Worked through the EEOC and the NLRB, so I kind of know what that process is like, and I've seen firsthand how those organizations are intentionally underfunded, understaffed, and overregulated by policy decisions that our lawmakers make. So all of these things came together and combined into reasons why I wanted to run, as well as some policy issues, such as where I live in Shelby County, we don't have a maternity ward anymore. I was so upset by the Dobbs decision, which impacts women's health. And we have a lot of issues going on. As everyone knows, in Alabama, we have one of the highest maternal and infant mortality rates. So all of these things kind of came together. And I have always realized in my life that, these policy things, when we don't talk about politics, or we say, politics aren't interesting to me, I don't care about politics, that's so wild to me, because politics are our daily life, right? Politics are the reason why I was able to eat when I was growing up. The reason why we had somewhere to live was because of policy decisions. Policy decisions impact our health care. Policy decisions impact our worker, our labor relations. So, policy is hugely important. So I wanted to be involved with that and be able to affect some change.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's really interesting to hear someone running for office who has that kind of background, dealing with poverty firsthand, also taking on employers firsthand. That's really, I think a difficult experience for a lot of people to undergo, to pursue an EEOC complaint or anything like that. And so, I can imagine it took a lot of courage to do that, just as it takes courage to run for office. So let's talk about the office that you are running for. Tell us a little bit more about this position and the district that it covers.
Sure. So 6th District of Alabama. So this is a House seat. I always thought that the House is so interesting, because the idea of the House is that it's the federal position that is closest to the people, right? So the House members represent the fewest number of people from just a federal level. Of course, like senators represent the entire state, but House members have a district that they're representing. So this district is Shelby County is the biggest part of this district. That's where I live. Gary Palmer lives here too. He actually lives right down the road from me. A little bit of Jefferson County, a little bit of Talladega County, which is where I'm from, where Childersburg is located, although Childersburg is sadly out of the district. Bibb County, Chilton County, Coosa County, Elmer County, and Otago County. So lots of rural areas, which I'm really happy about. That's new with the redistricting that just happened this past year. I'm excited to have some of the rural counties in this district, because I'm a rural girl myself, and that's my people. So like I mentioned, we were redistricted last year. I'm sure everybody heard about the big Supreme Court case that found, rightly so, that we had racial gerrymandering going on in the state of Alabama. That was not a surprise to anybody. I think a lot of us knew that. And if you look at some of these districts, the way that they are cut, it's pretty clear that they were very gerrymandered. Like, that didn't just happen organically, right? So it was kind of a gerrymandered district, and we did change up a little bit. We've got a call campaign going out pretty soon where we're going to start calling some people who got redistricted, so that people understand, and we want to make sure that people know which district that they're in.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about your platform. And you mentioned some issues already that are near and dear to your heart, but, talk to us a little bit about, in general, what are you running on, and, some of those particular issues that you're really passionate about?
Yeah. So first and foremost is reproductive rights. That's a huge issue for me, just, and always has been, right? When I was growing up, it was always, as someone who grew up below the poverty line, I think there was a lot of assumption of like when you get pregnant as a teenager, and not if. For me, that did not happen. That did not happen for me. I was able to, utilize health department services and things like that. And so that wasn't my reality, but it was a lot of the reality for my sisters and a lot of people in my family and a lot of people that I grew up with. So just making sure that we have adequate, reproductive health care. We want to make sure that we have birth control available to people who need it. We want to make sure that we have abortion access available to people who need it. And I know that that's a hot topic sometimes, but often when I think about abortion access, some of the things that come up for me are the number of very wanted pregnancies, people who want those pregnancies. And for whatever reason, it can be, there could be fetal abnormalities or problems, health problems for the mother, or, sometimes it's just not the right time. So I want to be very respectful of that and make sure that people are able to plan their families the way that they want to. That includes contraception, but it also includes things like IVF access, which has been a big deal here in Alabama. We know how important that is to people. So I want to be able to make sure that women have the right to control their own bodies. Related to that is maternal health care. I mentioned earlier that Shelby County, where I live, does not have a maternity ward at all, which is, kind of shocking. But when I was growing up, my mother actually, when she was in labor with me, so this is 40 years ago, right? A long time ago, she drove from Childersburg to Birmingham. I was born in Birmingham. That's an hour and 15-minute drive. She drove herself in labor because she did not feel that she had adequate health care nearby. And she didn't want to have a baby nearby because she was so concerned about, her baby's health, me, and then her health as well. And I've been really shocked because that has not really changed in the state of Alabama. Rural women in particular are still driving really long distances to be able to access health care, even when they're in labor, which can be really difficult. If I'd had to drive that far with my baby, I would have had the baby on the side of the road, right? And we don't want that for women, especially in a state where it is so scary to have a baby here. So want to make sure that we have adequate maternal health care, adequate infant health care. We don't do a good job on that in the state either. We have a lot of preterm births and we have a lot of babies who don't make it to their first year. So I want to make sure we've got that. We want affordable health care. I went to the emergency room earlier this year, and I was sitting there in the emergency room talking to people who were telling me stories about how they had to choose between life-saving healthcare and bankruptcy. And that's just not something that should happen to anybody, especially not in a country like the United States. A lot of it for me is about uplifting women and families. Of course, I am a survivor of domestic violence as a child, gun violence in particular. So I had a pretty tough time growing up, but want to make sure that we have adequate help for women and children who are experiencing domestic violence. Want to make sure, and this is a sticky topic, but want to make sure that we have some gun reform, which is nothing crazy. I'm a gun owner myself, but I just want to make sure that people who are dangerous don't have guns. Education, right? Like we want to make sure that we're educating our kids, that they're able to go to school and get a great education so that they can uplift their lives. That was important to me when I was growing up. I would not have gotten out of poverty if I did not have access to that education. And then, of course, poverty is incredibly important to me because I have been through some things and I don't want anybody else to have to go through those things. I want better for everybody else. Nobody deserves to have to go through that. I didn't deserve to have to go through that, and I don't want that for anybody else either. So lots of issues. It's always so hard with this to just kind of like pin it down. And I had such a hard time when we were developing the platform for the website because I said, I want to talk about everything. Everything is so related to each other and so important, but lots of issues.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's a whole lot I could ask you about there. But what I'd like to know, we mentioned that you are running against opposition. Congressman Gary Palmer is the incumbent, and I'm curious, just what kind of contrast would you draw between yourself and him, and whether it's your campaign, how you're running your campaign, or the platform that you're advocating for. What are your thoughts there? Like, what's the big difference, you think?
We are polar opposites, Gary Palmer and I. I have been in this district for a long time, and I've been writing letters to his office for years and years and years, and we have disagreed for many years. I think that there's probably not an issue that we agree on. At this point, I think a lot of the contrast is, I know that Gary Palmer is from a small town in Alabama as well, but I really want to see somebody in office for us that is working for working class people and cares about working class people's needs and cares about impoverished people's needs. When I was growing up, I never saw somebody in office that looked like me or had gone through some of the things that I had gone through. So, I really want to make sure that we have somebody in office who understands us. I think the latest stats are something like 16% of Alabamians and something like 20% 4% of children in Alabama are growing up in poverty. And we need people that's a huge number of people, and we need people who can represent the interests of people who are below the poverty line right now. As far as labor issues, because I know that that's really important on this podcast, we are at polar opposites on that. So, of course, I am very excited to say that I just recently secured an endorsement from the Alabama AFL-CIO, as well as from the IBEW and the steamfitters, our plumbers and steamfitters unions. I was so excited to talk to them. They are such wonderful people, really, really connected with those groups, and was able to secure endorsements from them, which we're really thrilled about. But Gary Palmer does not care for unions. He's been really consistently anti-union. I don't know if you saw, but in February of this year, he wrote an op-ed in the 1819 News, and it was called "Don't Let the UAW Kill the Magic of Alabama's auto industry." And he talked about unionization efforts as being, a result of national special interest groups. And he said that unions are trying to destroy, our economic ecosystem. He says that, unions kill jobs and suffocate jobs, which we know that that's not true, right? The AFL-CIO gave him a 7% lifetime rating. He was against the PRO Act in 2020. So he's been very proudly anti-union for a long time. And I kind of feel like it's really out of touch because, we got to support our workers, of course. We're like the workers are the backbone of the economy. How could we not support our workers? And we want somebody in Congress who's representing our interests. So, I'd say just broadly, polar opposites.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, it seems to be the case, and I really appreciate you bringing up that distinction there on labor specifically. Because we are a labor radio show, we're labor union activists ourselves, and we try to look at politics from the approach of working people, people in poverty, people who go to work for a living, people who have a boss, people who often have a landlord. The vast majority of us, right? That's the majority of people in this country, in this state. And we try to look at politics from that perspective and not necessarily from a, strictly partisan or ideological perspective, but no, what's good for regular old folks, and what's not good for us. So yeah, if you could just talk a little bit, you've already really explained, I think, both, the personal heritage you have, the connection to your grandfather. And I think that's really important because often in Alabama, many people aren't getting those family connections, right? As union density has declined over the years, there's less people in unions, right? That's less grandmothers and grandfathers who are talking to their grandkids about unions and how important they are. So you have that family connection, and you've mentioned a little bit already about your distinctions with Gary Palmer, but could you talk just a little bit more about kind of your approach to labor unions and what you want to accomplish on behalf of working class folks if you were in Congress?
Yes. So let me just take a step back and say, so I'm a business owner now, but I've been a worker my whole life, right? If you grow up like I did, you work really hard. And I think that's, sometimes that's a misconception. People will say that people in poverty are lazy. And that has always made me so mad because people who are in poverty and working class people are the hardest working people in this entire country. And I can say that definitively because I have experienced it. But I've been a worker for a long time and I know what it's like. And I know what it's like to work a really hard job without any kind of protections. I've had to work long, I've worked 24-hour shifts before. And I've worked in jobs that I did not have any kind of protections for anything at all. And it was hard. Right? It sucked. I didn't like it. And my kind of general philosophy on life is, anytime something bad happens to me, I want to make sure that doesn't ever happen to anybody else again. So want to make sure that we have lots of labor protections in this country because laborers, like I said earlier, workers are the backbone of our entire economy. And within my own business, I know that I take that really, really seriously. So we put a lot of worker protections in place, just sort of proactively. We pay living wages. We have something like 17 holidays. Like we really try to make sure that we're protecting people from toxic work environments. We just don't put people in them. We have a zero tolerance policy with our own clients that, we're just not going to accept putting people in a toxic work environment or making sure that people don't experience any kind of discrimination or abuse. Now, I will say that I have experienced some of those things. Like I said earlier, with the EEOC and NLRB claims that I submitted, that was really, really tough. That was hard. It was difficult. The process took forever. It was very difficult to get in touch with them. They are so understaffed, and it is very intentional that they're understaffed. So I want to make sure that we have better protections with those types of organizations so that they can do their jobs to help us, because they just can't right now. They're very overloaded, and this is something that's going on for years. And I know that there are lots of policies in place and lots of regulations on those organizations that are put in place by policymakers to make it more difficult for us, right? So that it is more difficult for us to file those complaints. It's hard to file a complaint. Like, just generally speaking, just to take the step to do it, it's difficult. A lot of people will say things to me like, oh, you are so brave for doing that. And I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that I'm brave for doing it. I think that I had resources. A lot of people don't have the resources to do that. And I want to make sure that anybody who needs to file an EEOC complaint or an NLRB complaint can do that, right? We don't have to have this conversation about whether or not you have the resources to be able to do it. In fact, it's one of the reasons I started my own business, because I know that when you file those kind of complaints, it can be a mark on you, right? And not everybody has the luxury to be able to do that, because I know that sometimes employers, they don't want to hire you sometimes if you file those complaints. I need that stuff to end. I know so many people who went through things that were very similar to what I did and just did not have the resources or ability to file a complaint. And everybody should be able to do that. With regard to worker issues, I also want to make sure that we secure minimum wage. I know that's a hot button topic, but I think it's really important. Within my own company, I have seen what it means to make sure that we pay a livable wage. It's good for workers. It's good for the business. I personally think that if a business cannot afford to pay somebody a livable wage, then they just can't afford to hire, and they shouldn't be hiring. So I want to make sure that we secure that. And of course, things like, I want to make sure that we stop tying our health benefits to our employer, because that means that it's very hard for people to go and secure health care for themselves for even life-threatening, conditions, because it is tied to their employer. And that really disempowers our workers, right? Because there's a lot of abuse that people can sometimes put up with because they know that they need their health care. And it can be very difficult to get another job. So things like that, I think, are really important. Just making sure that our workers are treated with dignity, with respect, and that we're enacting policies that are beneficial to workers.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing out that last distinction about healthcare being tied to your employer, and how that really does disempower workers and provide more power for the companies. I mean, it is what it is. If your survival is tied to that job, like you said, you're willing to put up with a lot more. It also can hold you back, right, from exploring other opportunities, perhaps, even starting your own business if that's where you want to go, right? So there's a lot to be said for that. So I think that's really important. And just to kind of expand on some of these issues specifically, I know one thing that is near and dear to my heart is the public sector and the lack of public sector rights that folks have to unionize and to have collective bargaining, particularly here in Alabama. But, a lot of our listeners will know that when the National Labor Relations Act was signed back in the 1930s, there were workers who were left out. And, not a coincidence that it was predominantly women and people of color holding these jobs that were excluded. And we're talking agricultural workers, domestic workers, and public sector workers like teachers. So there is pending legislation in Congress right now that would expand collective bargaining rights and union rights to public sector workers across the country, regardless of what state they're in, which would, certainly be beneficial to folks in the South, in places like Alabama, where our state laws are not like they are in California or New York, right? So if you're a teacher in Alabama, you have less rights than a teacher in California or New York. So all that to say, I'm curious what you think about that issue in particular, and how you feel about that.
This is one that sometimes when I'm talking about issues, it seems like such a no-brainer. Do you know what I mean? Like, of course, public sector workers should have the right to organize, just like every worker should have the right to organize. I have a hard time seeing how anyone can make an argument against it, because it's just so clear. I don't have to tell anybody on this podcast that, unions are the reason that we have weekends and days off, and we have safety protections at work. At a broader federal level, I mean, unions are so important, and unions, it's not just fighting for individual workers, but for all workers in all sectors. And so, of course, teachers should have the right to organize. Everyone should have the right to organize.
Well, I really appreciate that. And something else that I noticed on your website that I wanted to mention as well is the federal job guarantee. Something I harp on a lot on this show is that there are politicians who love to talk about the right to work. They love to say that Alabama is a right to work state. Now, what they mean by right to work is not exactly what it sounds like. Right to work sounds like a job guarantee. It sounds like you have a right to a job, which is something folks in our labor movement and the civil rights movement, from Dr. King on all the way to today, folks have fought for guaranteed employment, full employment, some sort of job guarantee. But right to work in their eyes is something very different. It's a way to harm unions and to allow folks to be taking services from unions without actually paying any dues or fees in exchange. But not to get on that rabbit hole, but that is always something that bothers me, right? That we use right to work as this term, but it doesn't mean what it sounds like. So tell us about, like, what would a real right to work look like? And what is a federal job guarantee, and why is that something you're supportive of?
So just kind of going back to the way that I grew up and some of the life experiences that I had, I think that the federal government and any government, in my mind, exists to benefit, people or its constituents, right? That's the sort of core basis of why we need to have a government, is to sort of organize all of us and also to benefit all of us and to look out for all of us, right? And I know that I know that, conservatives and liberals disagree, but that's my viewpoint. And I will tell you that going back to when I was growing up, those federal government programs were massively beneficial to me. When I tell you that we could not eat if we did not have free lunches, that was my only meal sometimes. SNAP benefits that fed us, right? My sisters utilized WIC benefits, and that was hugely beneficial to them. It kept their babies safe and their babies healthy, right? We have seen with things like the WIC program that it literally saves lives, right? So I'm a big believer in government benefits being utilized to help people. I don't believe in this idea that people are, leeching off the system, because that's just not my experience. And I can tell you firsthand, like, I've seen it. It's not hypothetical for me. Like, I've actually seen it. And I think that federal programs like that are so beneficial. We saw with the New Deal how wonderful it was to provide jobs to Americans. And that was hugely beneficial for our entire economy from top to bottom. So, federal jobs guarantee program is another one that I kind of feel like is a no-brainer. Of course, we should help our citizens. It helps our broader economy. All of these things, these safety net programs and federal job guarantee programs, all of these things, that anytime that we can help our citizens, we are helping the United States economically, and as building a world superpower. So I think, why not? Why not? Like, do you know what I mean? Why would we not? And as far as a right to work, I get so irritated with that phrase. Even when I was filing my lawsuit, it was a little confusing for me when everything first happened. So what happened in my lawsuit was I brought up some sex discrimination that was going on within the company. There was a lot of really discriminatory kind of stuff going on. We saw a lot of broader pay discrimination, especially for women in the country, in the company. Myself in particular, I was being paid about $20,000 less than like lower ranking men within the company who had fewer job duties. And we saw that across the board with women. And so I brought that up and I ended up getting fired. And when I got fired, the official reason was that I had a lack of humility, right? So that was the sort of stated reason. It wasn't a job performance issue. It wasn't anything else. They said it's a lack of humility because I had brought this stuff up, right? And it was kind of confusing for me because I kept, at this time I didn't really, I didn't know a ton of stuff about like what right to work really meant in our state. And everybody says, well, it's a right to work state. What does that mean? They can fire you for anything. That's not actually true. They cannot discriminate against you. I filed a lawsuit and I can tell you they can't, I'm not a lawyer, right? Like this is not legal advice, but they can't just fire you for anything like that. And I think that's really unclear to people when we talk about what right to work really means. And I also think it is unfair for them to fire you. Even if I did exhibit a lack of humility, I don't think that's a fireable offense, right? So we do need to make sure that we protect workers' jobs by really understanding clearly what right to work means. And also making sure that we provide those protections for workers, because it's like you said, right to work is one of those phrases that sounds like one thing and is actually something totally different.
Yeah, it really is. And to your point, it also often gets confused with at-will employment. And of course, it's just mind-boggling to say you have a right to work, but you also are at-will employees, right? So, I mean, how do the two go together, right? So it's very, very frustrating, and I appreciate you drawing out those distinctions. So one of my last questions would be, if people are interested, we've talked a lot about various issues today, but there's a whole lot more on your website. There's more, I'm sure that other folks would like to find out more about certain issues that we didn't get to today. So if people are interested, where could they find out more?
Yes, so it's www.ea4congress.com. So EA, Elizabeth Anderson, for the word FOR, Congress.com. That's the website. If you go on the website, you can go through the contact form. If there are any issues that you don't see that we can help answer for you, they're on there. We're trying to do more and more events lately. Would love to have folks come out to those events. And I have to say this, I know we're all tired of hearing politicians ask for money, but any contributions would be really helpful because, I'm a totally grassroots politician out here. This is my first time running for office. Somebody early on in the campaign said to me, they said, most candidates, they have like a rich dad who pays for their campaign, right? I do not have a rich dad paying for my campaign. Some candidates, we had a candidate recently in Alabama who put $300,000 into their campaign of their own money. And I don't know about y'all, but I do not have $300,000 just laying around. So we are really starting from scratch out here, and I know that it's a tough fight. I did want to address that really quickly. I know it's a tough fight. I know that we so frequently see people trying to kind of fight for the right thing, and especially in Alabama, where it is a super red state. I think that Sean Fain from UAW had a really good point recently on the Mercedes unionization efforts, where he talked about how it was a David and Goliath fight. And I think we are kind of in a David and Goliath fight on this as well. And that's okay. I'm good with it because, sometimes Goliath wins the battle, but David will win the war. floor, right? So we are out here, we're trying our best. Y'all know how important collective organizing is, and we're trying to bring that into this campaign. You know how important it is to keep fighting. So that's kind of what we're doing out here. So any contributions, can be super, super helpful for this campaign just because we are starting from scratch. But again, www.eaforcongress.com.
And finally, was there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to make sure we mentioned? And I really appreciated you bringing up the last point there about, the tough odds, because that was going to be my last question there.
Yeah.
You are facing some tough odds, but I appreciate you addressing that head on. Was there anything else you wanted to share before we let you go today?
Oh, I don't think so. Other than, I'm acutely aware of what the odds are, but I'm a fighter. I've always been a fighter my whole life. I have seen the ways that, because I know this inherently, I have seen the ways that politicians have put structural, systemic barriers in front of us that make it harder for us to just live our lives, from putting food on the table to getting health care, to just going out and, living and being happy. And I've seen those structural barriers. I know that they've been put there on purpose. I've been fighting up against them my whole entire life, from literally being born and my mom having to drive over an hour to get health care, right? So from birth, I have been fighting against these structural issues, and I want to keep fighting against these structural issues. I'm not going to stop. I hope that everybody here will not stop as well. We know that we've got long odds sometimes, but if we keep at it, we can do it, because it's worth fighting for.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time today, and just for your willingness to run for office and your willingness to come on this program and talk about working people and why working class people are relevant to this campaign. So really appreciate it, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Have a good day.
All right, y'all. So that was Elizabeth Anderson running for Congress. As you heard, she is running against the incumbent Gary Palmer. And as I mentioned at the top, I did extend an invitation to Congressman Palmer to come on the show. He's welcome to do the same kind of interview. We'll give him equal airing. But I really enjoyed that conversation because it was interesting to hear from someone running for office for the first time. Interesting to hear, someone coming from working class background. I saw a study recently that the Alabama legislature at most has one person that could be considered working class, who is currently serving in the legislature. So, you can discuss how that exactly is, identified maybe, but I think it speaks to a broader point, which we all know, which is that working class people are not very well represented in politics, in elected office, certainly, and particularly the farther up you go, right? When we're talking Congress and the folks that go represent us at D.C., it's very infrequent that it's working class people. So I really appreciated that conversation. We'll see how things shake out with that campaign, but I always appreciate when folks are willing to engage and talk to labor and talk to us about, specifically, what do you want to do for unions? How do you feel about us? We have to ask those questions, right? I think it's important that we confront candidates with these questions and with these issues and speak to the interest of working class people. Because if we don't, who will, right? So unions do have a special responsibility there. I know it can be very controversial when unions get involved in politics. As you have seen from the title of today's episode, we'll be wading into that a little bit later in the episode about, Trump and Biden and the 2024 election and some of the reactions from union leadership. And, unions have been big in the news cycle this past week in the context of this election. So we'll be wading into that. It's controversial. It's, impossible to please everyone. But there is some utility in political engagement on some level. I think it's fair to say. At the very least, we should be asking candidates where they stand on the issues and trying to educate working class folks on those answers. That's something that we're trying to do here in North Alabama. the North Alabama Area Labor Council, we developed a candidate questionnaire. We have sent that out to all the candidates for the city council and school board who are running in Huntsville. The election is coming up in August, I believe August 27th. So, stay tuned for more information on that. But that's something that we're trying to do here at the local level to really, just find out where do these candidates stand, because often working class people are not even part of the conversation when it comes to elections. Very few people in the media are really asking, where do you stand on minimum wage? Where do you stand on union rights? Where do you stand on public sector union rights? Are you going to engage in union busting? Will you use your own campaign to union bust, right? So those are all questions that don't come up very often in the media.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.